Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining me today on JSlay Made in the USA, where we explore truth, expose deception, and inspire courage. I hope you're inspired today. I know I'm going to be, because I've got a fantastic guest that we're about to not only have a show, it's going to be just a I think a grassroots, natural conversation. We become friends through the process of getting to know each other over the past probably 4 to 5, maybe 6 months. When I first came across the content of Joshua from Beholden to Truth, you can find his stuff. I believe it's at beholdentotruth.com, but please follow him on Instagram at Beholden to Truth. He also has a couple backup channels because, like anyone that discusses the kind of things that we get into, man, your stuff can be gone in a moment. You know, censorship is a big part of this conversation, and truly, there are so many things that have touch points into the conversation that we are going to have today. The reason I think this is a special show is it's personal to me. You know, many of you know, and I almost get tired of saying it because it sounds like a platitude, but it is so true. 3 years ago, I went all in. I pushed in my chips and I said, listen, I'm a Christian. I love this country. You know, I'm the Lee Greenwood, God bless the USA listening guy, heading to my church, you know, wanting the best for this nation and for my very young children at the time. I was a guy giving thousands of dollars a year to Turning Point, to PragerU, and other different conservative initiatives that I really believed in, because I thought these men, Dennis Prager and Ben Shapiro and Charlie Kirk, and, you know, those are the heroes of the conservative movement. And they go on the college campuses. They are willing to have the tough conversations and, you know, shut down their opposition through great argument. But here's what I found out with time. As I went to the Turning Point, you know, big fundraiser events and things like that, and I would sit down at tables with men who were 40, 50, 60 years old, and behind, you know, not in front of Charlie, obviously, but they would say things like, yeah, you know, Charlie's good. He's a good talent, but ultimately he's going with what the board has kind of told him to do. Then I meet somebody at my church, you know, within a year ago, that works directly with the Daily Wire and with Ben Shapiro and others that are, you know, involved in that company. And they would say things like, you know, when I go to them with something that could really turn the tide, a big story, especially with local Tennessee politics, that they really don't have a lot of interest in that, because they would rather fight the fight but never get to the source or the root of the problem. I know that sounds hard to believe, but I promise you with all my heart, I was told these things by employees or board members of these people. Okay. I'm not going to cite examples of who they are because I want to protect their identity. They still work for these people. And that led me to some very curious directions in what I was willing to explore. You know, I remember very clearly sitting around a campfire at this Christian getaway, Christian getaway for church leaders. And I was not a leader in the church, but I was invited to go, which I was honored to do so. And they knew that I was into talking about conspiracies on my JSlayUSA. And at this time, I was very accepted among this group of men. And all the men had gone inside, and I was kind of still sitting out there with one other dude. And the other dude said, as we were talking about 9/11, he said, yeah, you know, Jeremy, it was Israel and Mossad that did 9/11. And I remember this anger that like boiled up in me, because I was like, how dare you even say that? How dare you even think that? Especially at, you know, I didn't say it like that, but I was like, listen, I may believe a lot of the things you have to say, but I'm not willing to go there on that. But then, like I said, with the Charlie Kirk stuff and the Dennis Prager stuff, and as we marched forward in time, I saw all of the greatest ideas by these great conservative leaders in the prime of their life, never winning, always fighting, but then we're continually sliding to the left. But there was always one common denominator in all of it. And it was the same one as on, now I'm not talking about the lower level left foot soldiers that are, you know, on college campuses, but I'm talking about those in the know who have a lot of money on the left and on the right. You cannot criticize Israel, the Jewish people, anything to do with the Holocaust, or question it in any way. And that led me to ask a bunch of questions. And much like the HodgeTwins recently said on their podcast with Nick Fuentes, they said they began to ask some questions, and they were, number one, they were chastised for it. They were no longer allowed to speak at Turning Point events. And then second, not only were they no longer allowed to speak, they didn't like what they found as they asked those questions. So I've come to the places that I've come to and that I'm coming to in a very authentic, humble, hat in hand kind of a way. You know, this is not about me hating on anyone. As I've told many folks who've questioned me, it's like, how would it serve me to be against Jewish people or against Israel. Like everybody in my circle, everybody in my community, basically my whole church is of the stance where if you don't support this without asking any questions, there's something really wrong with you, probably wrong with your faith in general. And where I probably dive deeper than others is with the theological side of it, the Christian Zionism. Many of you have read the articles that I've put out about John Nelson Darby and others that developed this theology that basically put the future Jewish nation and Israel at the forefront of our belief system. And I was never told that was like a 250 to 200-year-old theology that was started by some very questionable people. So it's things like that. I know I'm kind of rambling, but I feel like you get the gist. I'm trying to set the stage for this conversation that I want to have with Joshua today, because not only is it guys like me that have, few 10,000 up to 100,000 people watching what I do, but it's some big names out there that are beginning to not only ask the questions, but also provide some answers. And I feel like Joshua with Beholden the Truth is one of those who is on the forefront of the movement. Very brave man. And he's got his own clothing line. He's got his own website. He does a great Substack. I just now discovered today, Joshua, I know you've told me this before, but I didn't know that you spent so much time on your articles on Substack. So links are in the description. I encourage everybody to check that out. And with that, Joshua, my friend, thanks for coming on, brother. Glad to have you.
Hey, Jeremy, it's good to see you again. Gosh, you went over so much in just that intro. I was trying to take notes like, I want to say something about that. I want to say something about that. So just to give a quick introduction to myself, to add to what Jeremy already explained, I have a platform called Beholden to Truth. It's about 2 years old, although I've been doing social media work for 5+ years, but it really started getting political and started to pull in my Christian faith a couple of years ago when the COVID thing happened, and that started to make everybody question the news and the government. I mean, those two things immediately were exposed as to being unreliable, whether it was information about the origin of the virus, the efficacy of the vaccines, whether or not you need all these boosters. And then you started to see the conflicts of interest that emerge when you start paying attention to the media and what the government say you have to do, and the news organizations who are beholden to their advertisers. I mean, I think a lot of us grew up naively thinking that when we watch the news, we're receiving journalistic content, people of very high integrity who are coming to us unbiased, simply trying to report the events on the ground. And what COVID showed me was that is not even remotely true.
Yeah.
And to quickly just provide one example that you can go back and watch the tape and see how true it is. Whenever you were watching CNN, MSNBC, ABC, even Fox News, they would talk about how extremely dangerous the virus is. Everybody has to get vaccinated. Everybody has to wear a face mask. We have to be 6 feet apart. You have to rearrange your entire life. You can't go to church on the weekends because we have to close those. You can't go to the gym and stay healthy because we have to close those. And now, a word from our sponsor, this program is brought to you by Pfizer and Moderna and and I'm like, wait, hold on. Can we just press pause on that alone? The people telling us we absolutely have to have this medication are the people that paid for the last 20 minutes of information that I just received.
That's right.
So observing simple conflicts of interest like that made me distrust a lot of what I was hearing on the news, which should lead you down to who runs the news? Why are they taking profits from drug pharmaceutical companies above simply sharing the truth? So that kind of opened my eyes to just how corrupt the news was and how they were in bed with a lot of these mega corporations. And as I dug further, I started to find out that our own federal government was feeding these news organizations, and this all came out in the Twitter files a couple years ago. The government was having weekly meetings with the head of Twitter, with the head of every legacy media outlet, saying, here are your talking points. Here's what you're allowed to say. Here's what you're not allowed to say. Yeah. You should not be talking about where did this virus come from and suggesting that it might be a man-made thing. You have to stick with it came from a bat in a cave or a wet market.
Yeah, and that's just the leaks that we've been allowed to see. We don't even know all of the emails and text messages that are back there in the dark,
Yeah, so I mean, I grew up, I'm 37 years old currently, and COVID was back when I was 33, 34, And so I was a 33-year-old, fully grown man, educated with a college degree, 20-year career, thinking that I understood the world around me pretty well, but it turns out I just didn't. When I actually scrutinize the people who are the authorities on any subject, whether it's immigration, whether it's viral outbreaks, whether it's foreign policy, how should we treat the people who we are in bed with from a military perspective, from a foreign aid perspective, you start to connect the dots that, well, look, if I couldn't trust them about an allegedly lethal virus that was going to kill my whole family, why would I necessarily trust them about what the best thing our military and our financial aid should be doing for other countries? So it's not to say you can't trust a single word that comes out of these institutions, but it is to say that we need to elevate our consciousness and pay a little bit more attention and fact check them. They call themselves the fact checkers. Unfortunately, we live in a time where we have to fact check the fact checkers. So the reason I name my platform Beholden to Truth is because what Jeremy just explained, he was trying to figure out, why is it that certain topics are off the table in discussion? The nation of Israel being one of them, the Jewish religion being one of them, Jewish ethnic culture, anything to do with Jewry, that's just disqualified from public discourse, unless it's complimentary, of course. You're allowed to praise them and you're allowed to say that they're our closest ally and we should do everything for them.
Oh, you'll get an entire show about that if you want.
Oh yeah, you won't only get a show. I mean, you'll get legions of followers, you'll get fame, and you'll get flown across the world to come hang out in Israel.
Oh yeah.
So if you take the company line on that subject, then it's very, very prosperous for you. But the complete opposite is true if you, I'm not even say negative things, but if you simply apply critical thinking, objective thinking, if you print out all the countries who receive foreign aid, top 5, and you say, I'm going to look at these countries one by one and try to understand, why do we give them this money? Additionally, we give them diplomatic support. Additionally, we give them military support. And you should do this exercise for every country that's on this list and figure out what's in this for us. Now, obviously, Jeremy and I are both Christian, and so Israel being the Jewish nation and Judaism having ties to Christianity, the Old Testament, obviously, that's where this subject starts to get really sensitive because, it's not just a matter of foreign policy. You're talking about God's chosen people here. So that's where you start to find out why this door is getting slammed shut suddenly. It turns out it has nothing to do with the simple politics of, is this a beneficial relationship for Americans, for Christians living in America? It's much more about a very long history of Christians and Jews, the founding of the nation of Israel that currently exists, that started in 1948 officially, but we know the accumulation of events that led up to that, and Zionism, Jeremy goes into that regularly on his show. The Beholden to Truth name and banner was because every time I tried to apply scrutiny to these things and look at the sources that I previously trusted, I was watching Daily Wire and I say, okay, well, I need to figure out where Daily Wire gets their worldview from. Where does Ben Shapiro create his ideas on foreign policy and how the religious fabric of our country should work and the ethnic fabric of our country should work? Where does he get his beliefs? What about Prager University? Where does he get his beliefs? What about Blaze TV? All these conservative news outlets. What about Fox News? And what I found was
question on that, Joshua. Were you like, I don't mean to interrupt you, but I got a quick question on that. All those you just named, back when COVID hit, right in that time period, not about COVID, but about the timing, say 2020, 2021, would you have been a fan of all those outlets at that time?
Oh, dude, I had what was that thing called? The membership for Fox News, where you could watch like all the streaming content you want. Fox Nation. That's what it's called. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
I loved it. I watched
on that stuff
every night.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so, I mean, I didn't know any better. They were making fun of the woke and they were talking about how bad Black Lives Matter was. And I was just nodding like, yeah, they seem to know what they're talking about. But they did not ever go into detail about what has happened. What is the cause for the apostasy in America? Like, let's try to actually tease apart what happened to previously 90% of America being Christian. And now currently that number is somewhere around 50%. and then the changing ethnic fabric in the country, where we're trying to embrace diversity and pretend that it's our greatest strength. And so the slogan goes. When I look around the world and I see such perpetual racial conflict and cultural conflict across the races, it became less and less clear to me that this is just implicitly and unquestionably a good thing. And the same is true with religious tolerance, where they say America has to be a country, one country under God, whatever God means. So long as you believe in a higher power, then we're all kind of on the same page, right? Well, does that mean if you think that Satan is God, you're free to erect a statue of Satan in the public park and in government buildings and open up a church of Satan and promote your satanic beliefs? Because if they think Satan is God, then what's stopping them from doing that? Mm-hmm. And so I just put a little bit more critical thought into this whole religious openness thing, and that America is essentially up for grabs. Whoever wants to come here and bring their culture with them and their religion with them, hey, if they can popularize it, then let's just turn it over to them. And that is precisely what's happened. And I don't think that's a great idea. No other nation in the world works like that. Every other nation in the world says, we have a heritage, we have people, specific people who built our nation, ancestors, and we have a common religion. And those two are the shoulders that most cultures and civilizations grow from, the people that are there and the things those people believe. And so as you look at American history, you see that America was a 90% white European country for the first 350 of its 400-year existence, from early 1600s all the way up to 1965 to 90% white country. And the same is true for Christianity, the exact same timeline. And so the apostasy away from the church, the change in the ethnic demographic, these things happening simultaneously. When I looked at those two subjects, and I looked at every conservative news outlet who reports on these two subjects, I started to find more problems in who these organizations are beholden to. So if you're Charlie Kirk, for example, and you want to talk about immigration because you're not happy with what's going on with that, well, if all of your financial aid comes from Israel, who is currently displacing refugees, non-white, obviously, refugees, most of them not Christian, and they need other countries to have open borders to receive those refugees, then this is just one small example of how we can't really point out on Turning Point USA or Fox News or Blaze or whoever else, we can't point out that the source of a lot of this immigration is coming from perpetual agitations in the Middle East for decades. And so we're not trying to import Muslim culture here. We're not trying to import Arab culture here. But the events unfolding in the Middle East as a direct result of Israel's existence force America and many other European countries into accepting people who do not follow Jesus Christ and people who care nothing at all about how America came to be. And so those are just a few examples.
Let me take that one node further, because I think a lot of people would hear that, be like, okay, that makes sense. But in America, with we've got open borders. You got to answer the question, like, okay, Israel and Palestine's one thing, but it's like 4,000, 5,000 miles away. However, who is in charge more than anyone else of our border right now?
Well, the federal government, clearly. The federal government are the people
one person would be Alejandro Mayorkas,
I think.
Mayorkas, who is Jewish. And when he was questioned about the open border by Josh Hawley, who, again, it's all contradictory. All this stuff is confusing on the right wing. You got Josh Hawley going at this guy saying, you should be embarrassed. You should be ashamed. And Mayorkas is like, maybe you don't know. Maybe you don't know that my parents are Holocaust survivors. It's like, So even though Israel has their game, they have these nodes of people who of prime importance in our federal government, as you said, that are allowing it to happen. So it's not just over there. It's also very much over here. And I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I think when it comes to the border, that point has to be made.
Well, it does. And I remember that little segment where he proudly says, I'm Jewish and my family survived the Holocaust and all this other stuff. Well, there's something unique about Jewish culture, and we need to be open about it And this is something that has been consistently true for thousands of years. And if you simply ask them, the thought leaders in Jewish communities, what do you guys think about diversity? What do you think about multiculturalism? There's a woman named Barbara Lerner Specter. You can Google her. She is an American Jew. She made it her life's purpose to move to Sweden, obviously a white European country, and to get embedded in their government and to affect their foreign policy so that they would receive more immigrants. Because this is something that Jewish culture advocates for everywhere they go. And there's a reason for this. And that is because their culture, their religious culture and the ethnic culture that is intertwined, because it is an ethno-religion, it stands out in stark contrast to a homogenous Christian culture. So when they show up in Germany, or they show up in America, or they show up in Sweden or France or Spain, the 100 plus countries that Jews have been evicted from over the last couple thousand years on more than 1,000 different occasions, one of the reasons why this continues to happen is because they insist on the host nation that they move to opening up multiculturalism for their people, which means bringing immigrants in and folding that foreign culture into the host culture. And the advantage of this for Jewish people is that they no longer stand out like a sore thumb. When they're practicing Talmudic rabbinical Judaism, which is modern Judaism, Temple Judaism is long gone. The Israelites in the Old Testament, in the Jewish religion that people think is the same as the current religion, that's called Temple Judaism. And people should fact check me on this, by the way. They should go to Wikipedia and they should just type in Temple Judaism, and they'll see that the ancient Old Testament religion of the Jews revolved around attendance of the temple, doing ritual sacrifices, burnt offerings, and it was obviously exclusive to ethnically Jewish people. That's Temple Judaism. That is not Judaism that exists currently at the synagogue down the street. The Judaism that exists currently in the year 2024 and for the last several hundred years is Talmudic rabbinical Judaism. And if you guys have watched Jeremy's show, I know he talked pretty regularly about the Talmud, which is the one of the three collections of doctrine for the Jewish religion that exists today. They have the Kabbalah, they have the Talmud, and they have the Torah. The Torah can loosely be referred to in all of those things, but when I use Torah, I'm talking about Old Testament and specifically the first 5 books. But the Talmud is a collection of rabbis, basically elders in the synagogues, interpreting scripture and applying their own human perspective of what does this passage mean? And more specifically, does this passage mean one thing for us as Jews, but something different for non-Jews, or is it the same for everybody? And so the Talmud, you can find these in your local synagogue. There's a great movie or documentary called The Other Israel, came out in 1987 by a guy named Ted Pike, where he walks right into a local synagogue, pulls the books off the shelf the same way I can pull these Encyclopedia Britannicas behind me off the shelf, and he opens them up, and they're editions of the Talmud, volumes of the Talmud, I should say. And just for a couple of guys' commentary about who was Jesus Christ. What do the elder rabbis of the current Jewish religion believe about Jesus Christ? That's a question that Christians living in America for the last, my entire lifetime, pretty much everybody who's alive currently, entire lifetime, that hasn't really been pulled apart. I mean, if you ask a Christian living in America, what do Jews believe about Jesus? They'll tell you something like, oh, they just don't believe he was the Messiah. And that's all. Okay, that is a egregious omission of the facts. And I want to specify egregious, because if you haven't heard this information before, slight trigger warning, because I myself love Jesus Christ and I've devoted my life to him. The Talmud states that Jesus Christ was a sorcerer, a liar, a blasphemer, a necromancer, and currently is burning in hell in a pot of semen and excrement. They don't stop there. They say that the Virgin Mother Mary was no virgin at all. In fact, she was a prostitute, a whore. And then they don't stop there. They elaborate that 98 to 99% of the world, everybody who is not ethnically Jewish, are what they call goyim, which is a subspecies of human beings, essentially animals in a human skin, who do not have the same human soul that Jewish people have. And I know a lot of this sounds like, what are you talking about? There's no way any of this could be true. I'm giving you the receipts right now. Go to the website bitshoot.com or rumble.com, type in The Other Israel 1987, and you'll see this straight from their own religious texts. And so this was very disturbing when I learned this. And so the platform Beholden to Truth has been my endeavor to say, when I go out there and I try to report everything I've learned, the truth as best as I know it. I'm not beholden to advertisers. I'm not beholden to a foreign nation. I'm not beholden to any other higher power other than Jesus Christ, who is the way, the truth, and the life. That's where the name comes from. So that's the purpose of Beholden to Truth. That's why it's called that, because every time I turned on the news, these people are beholden to advertisers. They're beholden to Ben Shapiro. Jordan Peterson can't say what he wants to say because he works for Ben Shapiro. Candace Owens can't say what she wants to say because she works for Ben Shapiro. Charlie Kirk can't say what he wants to say because they're getting money from Israel. All of our politicians can't say what they want to say because they're bought by Israel. AIPAC, the America and Israel Political Action Committee, is the largest donor to all of our political campaigns. And you're talking at the state level, federal level. And so it's like, if everybody is beholden to all of these conflicts of interest who cannot simply say something as clear and provably true as the Jewish religion hates Jesus Christ, who is God, if I have to remind anybody in the room about this. So it's kind of a problem if we're sitting around looking at the government, looking at the media, looking at the education system, looking at the finance industry, who controls our currency, who prints our currency, who chooses the interest rates. If the overwhelming majority of people occupying the leadership roles in each of those civil institutions hate God, how do you think your country is going to unfold?
Yeah.
That's a very simple question that I hope everybody thinks about.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really good. It's a great intro, Joshua. One thing that came to my mind, because this was something when I first started hearing these things regarding the Talmud, and by the way, I looked up how to say it specifically. It is Talmud, not Talmud. I've said it like all these different ways till I looked it up. Talmud.
Yeah.
My big question on that had been for a long time, how important could it really be? You know, they like, we can, maybe that's just like a neo-Nazi thing to say this Talmud, which is basically a commentary of the Mishnah. Maybe nobody cares anymore. That's not the case. If you look at the Jewish encyclopedia from the 1940s onward, they say that it is the single most important work discussing the Torah, and that it is the religion of the rabbis. Now, I think that's important. That's an important distinction to make, because a lot of the people watching this might say, hey, I've got Jewish neighbors, I've got Jewish friends. Obviously, they don't think like that about my Messiah, Jesus Christ. They don't think in those terms, or they wouldn't come over and have dinner with us. It would be a very different relationship. And I think that there's some truth to that, but I think here's the deal. If it's the religion of the rabbis, and just like in Christianity, and you can correct me if you think I'm wrong, you've mentioned 50% of Americans are Christian. Well, do 50% of Americans really, really read their Bible and live according to the tenets of the New Testament? Do they really? I think you could say the same thing about the Jewish people, especially in America. Even if they say they're Jewish, it doesn't mean they really know what's in the Talmud at all. So what they're doing is going along to get along. But there's a cultural shift that happens when the religion of the rabbis is the Talmud. And so they are pushing forward a message, which the trickle down effect is your, common neighborhood Jewish person may not even realize what direction that their rabbi is going, if they even go to synagogue. But there's this thing that happens where, I've got videos of Benjamin Netanyahu, who I don't believe is a very religious Jewish person. He may be behind the scenes, but it doesn't seem that way. Or Steven Spielberg, you know, who made the movie. What's the famous movie about the Holocaust that he made that so many people?
Schindler's List.
Schindler's List, right? I've got video of Schindler's, the mother of Steven Spielberg, going to Rabbi Menachem Schneerson, who the Jews thought was the Messiah, at least a certain sect of them for a little while, basically getting him to pray over his future films and how it would affect America. All right. Then you've got Schneerson going to Benjamin Netanyahu, basically putting his finger in his chest saying, you've got to do something to bring about Moshiach, or whatever they call the Messiah. And Netanyahu's like kind of taken aback, saying, we will do something. We you know, there's still some time left in the day. We will do something. Like, so you've got these rabbis that know the game, and they're pushing these political figures, and they're pushing these others who are more secularist, but they don't even understand how they're being led by the nose. Does that make sense?
It does. And there's something, the interwoven, inextricable nature of Jewish culture, because it is an ethno-religion, it specifies in their religion that it is tied to their blood, that even people who opt out of the practicing aspects of being a Jewish person, they would still, with open arms, receive a lot of the downstream Jewish culture. And a good way to look at this is the same thing happens with Americans who aren't Christian per se, but they still believe things such as marriage should be monogamous, right? Like, you know, they're not one of the woke, they're not one of the left people, they're just an average American, but they're not Christian. And they believe in traditional gender roles. They may not be a Christian, but they believe a lot of the things that are defined in the New Testament are good principles to live by. Yeah. They're part of Christian culture that, whether or not they call themselves Christian, they may not even realize they're perpetuating Christian ideas and beliefs. Another one being, everybody is owed equal rights. What they call human rights nowadays did not used to exist before Christianity. That's not a thing before Christianity. This idea that no matter what religion you are, no matter what race you are, what nation you're from, everybody is owed a baseline of dignity. Nobody should be tortured. Everybody should have access to free speech. Everybody should have access to food and shelter. Human dignity is a universal right for all humans, as established by Christianity. Yeah. That's not a universal truth of the world. And so there are many people who believe that.
The scary thing is, and again, I don't mean to interrupt, Joshua, but the scary thing is the Talmud, if that's the religion of the rabbis, of these religious leaders, who the trickle-down effect, it's affecting everybody in that community, it says the opposite about equality among people, and that our souls are equal as humans under God. And when you dig in deep to the Kabbalah, you realize, like, there's even like a round table of gods they have, and the highest one is this one called Ein Sof, that's not even Jehovah. Like, it's just this craziness going on.
Yeah, and this is the tricky part of Jews obfuscating culpability with their beliefs culturally or religiously, or, very importantly, the third pillar, their allegiance to a foreign nation. There are a lot of secular Jews living everywhere who don't participate in Judaism, the religion, but they fully support the nation state of Israel because they've read history. They know that ethnic Jews have been persecuted. They probably believe for completely irrational reasons. Anti-Semitism is the oldest form of hatred, is what they like to say. Yeah. For no reason whatsoever, on these 1,000 plus occasions in 100 plus different countries, the leadership in those places have decided that the Jewish people have to relocate. Something about either their religion or their cultural practices that they're handing down from generation to generation are simply not compatible. They genuinely refuse to assimilate, and they withhold their priorities and their devotions. At number one ranking is always going to be their own people, which is fine because I feel the same way, but also a foreign nation. And so if you're an American, especially a politician living in America, making a career out of being a politician for American politics, it is absolutely absurd and wrong for you to have a foreign nation as a higher priority in your life, the safety of that nation, the prosperity of the nation, the people living there. If you have that as a higher priority than the safety of America, the economics of America, the people of America, the identity of America, the religious fabric and origin of America, if all of those rank beneath Israel and beneath Jewish culture and beneath the Jewish religion, I'm sorry, but you should not be in positions of leadership in our country. It's antithetical to the people who built the country with a specific framework, a Christian morality and European cultural practices. European cultural practices are homogenous. They say, keep Germany German, keep Sweden Sweden, keep Italy Italian. Jews do not believe this. Jews, whenever they move into whatever nation, they have no regard whatsoever for preserving the heritage ancestors of that nation. It's much more about, well, we know we're not from here, so we know we will never be seen as truly equal, not in terms of value, not in terms of worth, but in terms of desirability for the culture that you're trying to install and preserve. And so they know in order for them to feel comfortable, they're going to have to invite other cultures to come and participate, like a melting pot. That's where that phrase comes from. And so this is just one of the ways they use their positions in leadership to advocate for themselves and their priorities, which we are now finding out oftentimes are conflicts of interest to simple Americans who just want America to be representative of the ancestors who built it and their own religion and their own worldviews. And that's coming in clash right now with the foreign nation of Israel and with the idea of religious tolerance and with the idea of multiculturalism, all three of which are priorities number 1, 2, and 3 for Jewish people. Mm-hmm. So, and that's true for the religious and ethnic side of international Jewry.
So one thing, Joshua, when I want to say this to the audience, when this show ends, right when it ends, I'm going to post our previous shows because there's probably half the audience watching that's like, what do you mean Jews in all these positions of power in our government or in Hollywood? And I know to the other half, they're like, of course, you know, but to many, it's still a new thing. I know 6 months ago, I had no idea about just the overrepresentation of Jewish influence in our own federal government, et cetera. So our previous show was called Don't Talk About It, which I think was an apt title. I'm going to post that. So I encourage everyone that has that question, please watch that. And to back in that, you know, conversation, when somebody hears the big statements that we've just made so far on this show, or they hear what you've just said and they say it scares them. And they think, gosh, this is starting to sound like, you know, neo-Nazism, or it's starting to sound like this could turn in quickly to full-blown racism. One of the questions I sent you, I wanted to ask, first of all, how do you counter that? Because I know you well enough, and I know a lot of people in the America First movement, that's just not the case. Like, it's not about hating anyone. So that's one question. How does this not turn into racism? And second, what is the driving force behind you being so vocal in this movement? Is it hope, anger, fear, or something else?
Great questions. So you used the word racism a couple times, so I'll address that. I'm probably one of the best people to address that because last year I felt compelled to write, film, edit, star in, promote a full-length documentary film called Is Racism a Sin? And obviously it's kind of a provocative title, but all of us currently alive in America, assuming you're not 80, we grew up post-civil rights movement. And the civil rights movement installed a belief in all of us that said, if for any reason you prefer your own people's culture over someone else's, some other ethnic group's culture, that is immoral. That is racism. That's one of the definitions of racism. They also say to assume you know everything about somebody based on their race alone, that might be considered racism too. But the much more problematic idea is that it is somehow morally wrong for you to prefer the ethnic cultural practices of your own people over somebody else's. They have used this tactic against only white people and European nations. They have said, if you're a white person living in America, Canada, New Zealand, Australia, any of the other European countries I mentioned earlier, look at what's happening to Germany, it's happening in Sweden, it's happening in France. They say, if you have some kind of outspoken, meaning you're actually willing to say this out loud, you know, I think we should probably keep France French and we should keep Germany German. Well, they say, well, what about America? Because America isn't like a single population group from one European country. Isn't it a melting pot of cultures? And isn't diversity a strength because we took all these different European countries, mixed them together, and that is the birth of America? Well, the birth of America, going back to the early 1600s, you have the British and the Dutch settling here. The Swedish come soon after that. Eventually, you have Irish people, Italian people, and I mentioned before, fact check me on this, please. The United States Census Bureau will affirm to you that just as recently as one lifetime ago, 60 years ago, in 1965, America was 90% consistent of these various European countries. And this is important to point out because European countries, when you look at them across each other, have far more in common than when you look at them compared to other parts of the world. Meaning, if you look at an African country and compare it to pick a European country, it's going to have a lot more differences than if you just compare two European countries within Europe. Mm-hmm. And the same is true if you were to pick random Asian country, and the same is true if you were to pick some South American country, Central American country. If you look at Indian culture, it's going to be much more different than European culture than picking two within India. And so this idea that America is a country of immigrants from the beginning, and so we have no right to say we should try to restrain immigration in order to preserve our European culture, that's also not true. And I want to point this out because I get this message pretty frequently. They say America is a country of immigrants from the beginning. So how do you fight that how do you counter that argument? Well, the word you use, immigrants, is the wrong word. The people who came here that I mentioned before, the British and the Dutch, the original Pilgrims and Puritans, they didn't come here to a country that already had an economy up and booming, a government already installed. They didn't come here and adopt the religion of the land. They came here and created a civilization. They created the government methods, the education system, an economy. They built churches. They did not build mosques. Right? They did not build synagogues. These people came here with a very specific set of religious beliefs and cultural practices that are different than the rest of the world. No, they did not immigrate to a country that's already up and running and just choose to participate in it for all of its benefits. They created this place. And so we have to be very clear on the language. That's a very deceptive tactic to say America is a country of immigrants. No, America is a country of settlers. We came here and settled this land and created this society that we currently enjoy all of the benefits of. We built that. And so when you try to compare the original people who came from Europe and created everything we have today to somebody from Guatemala coming to America today and say that that's the same kind of immigrant and it's no different, that's not true. It's just not true. They're not coming here to say, I have a great idea on how we should construct the government, and I have an idea for a better economy, and I'm going to bring Christianity to this land and try to spread the gospel. That's not why immigrants are coming to America today. Mm-hmm. They're not coming to settle this land. Okay, that's the key argument there. And so you ask, what's this concept of racism?
Yeah. So the question is, how does it not devolve into that, especially when you can see a very small minority of people that are controlling so much of these things that are negatively affecting our country right now?
Yeah, so this concept of racism at the root is about preference. It's about ethnic preference. What kind of culture, built by who, do you prefer? Whose company do you prefer to have around you? And if you have a problem with company of others that you don't feel compatible with, they're celebrating holidays that you don't celebrate, they're speaking a language you don't speak, they worship gods you've never heard of, who you think are deceptions of Satan. These things actually have real implications in our lives. When you have a nation that's trying to practice an ongoing sense of denial about the differences between the various religions and the differences between the various ethnic cultures, that's the melting pot that we have. It's more like a powder keg. You can't have this many different religious worldviews and this many different ethnic loyalties trying to live on top of each other without unavoidable, unending conflict, which is exactly what you see every time you turn on the news.
Yeah.
So this concept of racism saying you're a morally inferior person if you believe that America should stay majority white European people. The easiest way to debunk this is to say, does that test still apply if you apply it anywhere else in the world, such as, let's just pick Nigeria. If you're a Nigerian person, a black Nigerian person living there, let's say, and you're looking at the Nigerian census data going back to 1960, and you see that your country used to be 90% Nigerian, people who look like you, spoke the same language as you, believe the same things that you do. But then fast forward one lifetime and you're living in the 2020s, and currently Nigeria is only 50% Nigerian. And what you're noticing in the government and what you're noticing in the education system and the media is that Nigerians are having a hard time securing positions of influence in all of those industries. If you were that Nigerian person and you raised your hand and said, hey, listen, it's not about hatred. I don't hate these other people who have come to our country. I don't hate people who have brought their religion over to my country, but I'm Nigerian. I know my country was built by Nigerians. And so I think it should stay that way. Nobody would come after that Nigerian black person and say, whoa, racist much? Are you kidding me? Like, what do you just hate white people? You hate Jews?
Well, you
hate Asian people?
Yeah, absolutely. Even bring it closer to home, though, because, I mean, we talk about Japan, China, Nigeria, that all have this like built-in ethnocentric interest that nobody is saying is bad. But it's when you come here, if you're white European and you say, I prefer that culture, I want this to stay a majority white European nation, all of a sudden it's like, oh, you know, even on a podcast, like you can't say that. But yet if I go to Target and I go to the rap section, I'll see titles on the actual albums that say like Black is King. You know, it's like, whereas if I'm a white rapper and it said white is king, like all of a sudden I'd be like the worst person in the world. You know, I'd be on the top 10 list of some mainstream news channel calling Jeremy Slayden is the worst person in the world. So it's a total, you know, double standard.
Oh, I mean, those daily real life examples are so important. And I'm glad you mentioned the one about the music section of Target. Here's one that happened to me just this week. I got the pictures to prove it. I'm sitting at Planet Fitness and there's some woman on the treadmill. I have no problems with this woman because she is black. She's a black woman, but she's wearing a shirt that says very black, very proud. And I'm sure she did not think twice about wearing this shirt. I mean, I don't think anybody's going to give her a hard time about wearing this shirt.
Well, she thought twice about how proud she was of it. She was very proud of wearing the shirt.
Yeah, I'm sure she wasn't sitting around thinking, I hope I don't lose my job for wearing this shirt.
No way. Yeah.
Right? So this double standard that only applies to white people, that only applies to white nations, has to be pointed out. It is not about hatred. It has nothing to do with that. It's about white people being slandered and persecuted unfairly. And so this is an important thing that I want to call out here, because the most common question I get running my platform, which stands for 3 principles in general. One is Christ culture. Everything in our culture has to be traced back to the Bible, the New Testament, Jesus Christ teaching. That's one thing I stand for. But then, as you guys have heard me elaborate now for a little bit, I also stand for white identity. Meaning our country, we actually have a ethnic identity. We are a people. And somebody has to advocate for those people the same way this black woman at Planet Fitness was saying it's an awesome thing to be proud of black people. And I wouldn't disagree. If you're an African person, by all means, be proud of African culture. If you're Chinese, you should be proud of Chinese culture.
Yeah.
Hey, if you're white, you should be proud of white culture. But this is where they try to stop you. They try to say, yeah, but it's different because white people, you know what happened with slavery and you know what happened with colonization. So it's kind of different. White people, you know, we got to be a little more scrutinizing when we talk about them. You have to swat this argument down because the slavery and colonialism arguments that they use to slander white people are absolutely absurd on their face, for the simple fact that every other empire that has risen and fallen in human history, you can go and look at the Mongolian Empire, you can go and look at the Ottoman Empire. Do you think, take the Ottoman Empire, for example, the expansions of Islamic Arab people including many European countries just steamrolling them and replacing their people and their beliefs. Do you think that happened through pamphlets and putting brochures on people's front door that said, hey, we'd like to live here now, and we think our religion should be the religion of the land? That wasn't white people doing that. What do you think the Crusades were about? They were a defensive measure to stop the spread of imperialism. So this idea that white people are somehow uniquely guilty, that we have this blood-stained past that nobody else has in terms of colonizing other nations, in terms of utilizing human slavery. On the slavery note, at the exact same time period of the North American slave trade, we can talk about who owned the overwhelming majority of the slave ships, Jews, even if you don't want to go down that path. At the same time as slaves were being shipped, African slaves were being shipped west to the New World, they were also being shipped east to the Arab states. Well, the reason there's not a sizable African population in the Middle East now is because the slaves that went that direction were castrated. Their family lines ended there. So whenever somebody tries to come at you as a white person, this is for all the followers watching, they're going to try to tell you that there's something uniquely bad about white people, uniquely bad about America's history because they did these two things. They colonized the land and they had human slaves. Okay, that's true of every ethnic group and their imperialist endeavors throughout all of human history. So white people have done nothing uniquely wrong. We have nothing to apologize for. There are no reparations to be given for this. And so the thing that I get constantly DM'd about and people try to think that they have somehow dismantled my entire argument is they'll point to my Christian faith. They'll say, yeah, I understand what you're saying about white people and maybe they aren't uniquely different or guilty or anything like that, but you're a Christian, which means you believe everybody is equal in value in God's eyes. And so shouldn't that mean you have to treat everybody as welcome as each other? If an African wants to come live next door or in your country, what right do you have to say no to that as a Christian? As a missionary, which I consider myself as, I'm somebody who goes on the internet to a global audience. I have a lot of followers from the Middle East. As a missionary, my responsibility is to do what Jesus Christ told me, which is to rebuke sin and to correct lies that are being told. Of the 10 commandments, bearing false witness, lying, is one of them. It's a serious matter that we have to take seriously. When people are lying about our entire race, saying that we are at a biological level more violent, more oppressive, worse than these other races of the world, that's a lie. That is bearing false witness about an entire 10% of the world. So I frankly don't want to hear it when somebody comes to me and says, wait, you're a Christian. You can't go out and advocate for white people. Okay, Jesus Christ said, rebuke lies and stand for those who are being persecuted. If somebody is bearing false witness against you, do you think Jesus would sit around and say, yeah, you just got to let them keep lying about you. Don't say anything. Let them reduce your population to zero. Let them actually perform ethnocide on all of your people, because it would be divisive to say something about that. Of course not. Defending those who are being persecuted and borne false witness against is part of the missionary work that we're called to do. And it just so happens at this point in human history, white people fall into those two categories. And all you have to do is open your eyes. Even Tucker Carlson is talking about this. Charlie Kirk is talking about this. What was called a conspiracy theory only 3 or 4 years ago, the Great Replacement, refers to the demographic change in America and all the European countries, that it is an intentional effort of people who do not care whether or not Europe and America remain majority white. That's an intentional, organized, ongoing effort to call that out and to say, this is just true. It is happening. There are people who want it to happen, and they're creating lies about white people to make it happen. That does not violate my Christianity to go out and try to stop that. So I hope that provides a little bit of reassurance to people that it's not about hatred whatsoever. It's not about xenophobia or anything. It's about the truth. That's why the platform is called Beholden the Truth. We are being lied about, and we are losing control of our own countries that we built. And somebody has to advocate for us. We have to take our own side for a change.
Yeah. And just like Pride Month, you know, the whole LGBTQ thing is being shoved down our throat, whether you like it or not. And it's funny, the big corporations, they don't really even care what the majority of the people want anymore. I mean, I'm a former baseball player. Major League Baseball and minor league baseball on their official platforms have put out these rainbow colored balls saying like love, acceptance, tolerance. And you've got all these former players in the comments, like myself, I wrote it too. It's like, we don't give a shit about that stuff, and we never did. What are you doing, MLB? You know, we're calling them out. They simply don't care because they're funded by these interests. You know, BlackRock and those others, Vanguard and the others, they own all of that stuff at this point, and they know like they've got enough money to weather the storm of the majority of the common people. It's kind of crazy, and that's on the LGBTQ side of things. On the white, you know, versus the other ethnocentrisms, all you got to do is walk into a big box store, a Target, a Walmart, and look at the advertisements on the walls. Look around. See if you can find more than 1% of those being a traditional looking white European male. You won't, period. Yeah. So it's rather obvious at this point, and to deny it means, I think most people are just afraid. They see it, but they just feel they've been so conditioned by the potential backlash. And I mean, one of the titles of this show is, you know, the ongoing pain of noticing. So these things, it is not without its sacrifice to notice and to speak out about it. And here's what I want to do. I want to change gears to some more current events and things going on right now with the total, you know, movement, Joshua. If you don't mind, let's take like a 2-minute break. I'm going to put you on screen real quick. Nope, that's not it. I thought I had it ready for you to go. Let's dive into some things. We won't take the 2-minute break. Let's dive into most recently Nick Fuentes, who is I think in your mind, he's probably like the leader of this movement. Describe the movement in general. America First, you know, Groyper, the whole, like, people know the little green frog. Is it Pepe the Frog? Something like that. Yeah. I wasn't privy to that stuff when it was first. I mean, I would see the little green frog and I didn't know what it was about. Or I would hear about Nick Fuentes and I would just be told in like a comment section somewhere from a mainstream person like Charlie Kirk, don't ever listen to this guy. He's a racist. So I just wrote him off. Right. And then the Kanye thing happened where he was kind of involved. And so that didn't really help his case back then, in my opinion. But here more recently, like, I've actually listened to him. And I'm like, okay, he'll say some inflammatory things that I may not agree with, but a lot of this is freaking like on point and smart. So can you go back a couple years and explain sort of where this movement came from, what a Groyper is, what America First really means, etc.? I just want to put that ball in your court.
Yeah, I would love to do that because it's important context to provide. And I'm sorry, I was looking away. I was pulling up Nick Fuentes' Wikipedia because it's pretty amusing. I actually posted a little 1-minute reel on my Instagram, I think yesterday, where I just read verbatim what Wikipedia claims is true about Nick Fuentes, and what whoever is behind the scenes manipulating Wikipedia, which, by the way, the ADL, the Anti-Defamation League, which is the Jewish-run, founded and operated by Jonathan Greenblatt, not founded by Jonathan Greenblatt, but that's who currently runs the ADL. It's an organization to advocate for Jewish people and defend Jewish people. They employ a full-time workforce to sit on Wikipedia and edit Wikipedia articles about individuals, about political parties, about platforms. You guys know Wikipedia. I don't have to explain Wikipedia for you, but the point is this Jewish watchdog group pays people to sit here all day long and groom articles. So if there's somebody who has invoked the Jewish people's ire, then they will go to their Wikipedia space and initiate a slander campaign against them. And they will try to find every single clip they can find that is cut out of context, or perhaps it's a sarcastic joke, or maybe it was just a moment of error to speak uncouthly, maybe a little too aggressively. We have all done that. To pretend that any of us haven't said something that we probably shouldn't have said that's a human condition problem. That's not unique to any of us. So Jeremy has it up on the screen there. You're looking at a picture. Nick Fuentes is a 25-year-old man currently. He's been in politics for 7 years. He got into it, even while he was still in high school. And the story goes, at 18 years old, he was a rising star. He had already attracted the attention of the Daily Wire. And he was talking through text and whatnot about trying to start contributing to the Daily Wire. And while he was doing this, he was your average conservative, just like Jeremy and I talked about how we were average conservatives. We watched Turning Point. We watched Fox News. We watched Prager University. And we thought that was a pretty objective commentary on the world and that they were right. But he happened to notice the amount of financial aid that we give Israel, which is like $3.8 billion a year. And when you go back all the way to 1948 and add up all the money we've ever given Israel, it's like $250 billion. And that's just in financial aid to their nation. We also give financial aid to Egypt and Jordan to keep them off of Israel's back. And so Nick was just trying to state, out of general curiosity, maybe a little bit of naivety, what is this relationship our government has with Israel, where we give them foreign aid? He's growing up in the time where we just are wrapping up the wars in Iraq, Afghanistan. Yep. We've killed millions of people over there for Israel. What exactly is in this for us? And why do we have an obligation to always be behind Israel? It seems like every politician who has a microphone is behind Israel. Seems like no news organizations are willing to criticize Israel. That's just weird. Like that, say whatever you will about them, but can we at least have a conversation about it? And when he started asking these questions to his contacts at Daily Wire, he was told immediately, if you want to work here, stop asking these questions. Mm-hmm. Because maybe you can talk about them in private, but you can't talk about them on the air. And you're never going to be able to get a position working here if you're insistent on this subject. And so he got canceled at the young age of 18 years old by Ben Shapiro himself, saying, sorry, you can't work at Daily Wire because of what you believe about Israel, because you're so skeptical of them. And this is before Nick got into exploring the Jewish religion. This is just talking about our foreign policy relationship with a foreign nation. And he said, you cannot work for one of the largest conservative news outlets in our country because of this one issue. And so naturally, when somebody tells you you can't do something, you start to, like a teenager or like a child, you're kind of like, well, why not? So he starts asking more questions and he gets into, well, it's kind of common sense. Israel is the nation for Jewish people. So maybe I need to learn a little bit more about the Jews, quote unquote, the ethnic side of their culture and the religious side of their culture. And that's where you end up going down the rabbit hole of discovering what's in the Talmud, however you say Talmud,
it. Yeah. And Joshua, do you mind if I do this? Because I think it's now a very poignant time to play that little clip, because based on what you're saying, and hold your thought, because I want you to continue to expand on that. But this is going to add a lot of validity to both what Fuentes says about his own journey, what you're saying about it, and also it mirrors mine very much. And I think yours, from coming at this from a very innocent, like, hey, I was just asking questions and I believed what everybody else believed, but then I saw big holes that no one was willing to answer. So I'm going to play this, then we're going to come right back to you.
It's disturbing when you really get to the root of it. And the shocking thing, people may be skeptical. Maybe you're skeptical of the things I'm saying. Mm-hmm. I started asking questions about this stuff, and I thought initially, this is crazy. There's no way this stuff is true. Mm-hmm. Surely it's all a misunderstanding. So I was looking for the debunk. I'm looking, where's the book? Where's the movie that says, oh, everything that we're told is obviously true. Here's all the evidence. Never found it because it's not there. Yeah. And the more that you dig, trust me when I say this, the smarter you are, you will find more and more and more. The rabbit hole just goes deeper and deeper. Deeper and deeper. That's been my experience for 7 years. I started out very basic, like Judeo-Christian. Doesn't make sense. Christians believe Jesus is God. Jews don't. Doesn't make sense. I've gone all the way. Now I know the names. Now I know the methodology. I mean, I've been in this for 7 years, and I think I have a very good understanding of it, rather than the other way around. You'd expect someone researching it for 7 years to say, oh, here's why it's all crazy. No, you just keep finding more.
You know what? I grew up in the South. We grew up in Martinsville, Virginia. And growing up, I experienced racism.
That's enough of that. But, I think he's laying out kind of what you said. And, oh, by the way, here's this supposed, according to the mainstream, massive white supremacist who's having a very amicable and fun conversation with two black men on their podcast. So,
yeah, I mean, this is where if you just quickly look at his Wikipedia, it says known for, on the right side of the Wikipedia, known for Holocaust denial, hate speech, white supremacy, misogyny, homophobia, anti-Semitism, neo-Nazism, Christian nationalism, white supremacism. And so this is the hit job that happens to everybody who makes critical comments of one of three things: the Jewish religion, the nation of Israel, or Jewish people's ethnic cultural practices. If you have any criticism towards any of those subjects, there you become a neo-Nazi, you've become an anti-Semite, you are a white supremacist, and so on. And so what you'll find, if you pay attention to anybody who makes these comments, you'll see a cancellation campaign, a slander campaign that is launched against them. They go after your professional career, your public reputation. They'll go after your finances. In Nick's case, this is a guy who had tens of thousands, if not even hundreds of thousands of people watching his show. He gets banned from YouTube, banned from Twitter, banned from his streaming platform DLive before that. He gets banned from Instagram. His bank accounts get shut down. He gets put on a federal no-fly list as if he's a freaking domestic terrorist.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's people who have raped people and murdered people who don't receive this kind of treatment.
Oh, yeah.
And that is just wrong. It doesn't, I mean, you can slander and say Christians are the worst people in the world. And those white people, they are violent, they are evil. And you can say anything you want about other racial groups, especially white people and especially Christians. If you're an atheist and you want to go out there and say, I think Christianity has been a net harm on the world, I think we would be better off without Christianity. And then, as I've pointed out several times, you can talk about the cruelty and the evilness of white people all day long. But the moment you apply the same level of, this is just my opinion, looking at the historical report card of what these people do, what they believe, it's just my opinion, it's the end of your career, you get kicked out of the church. I mean, like, the list goes on and on. Your family members disown you, the financial repercussions, it's a serious double standard that exists that has been carved out for one ethnic religious group of people, that they've built this bubble of irreproach around themselves. And the way they do this, by the way, the reason Holocaust denial is specifically called out on Nick's webpage, the argument goes like this for Jews. They say, if you want to go in and swim in this water of being critical of Jewish people, the way they embrace usury, or the way they embrace transgenderism, the way they forced the sexual revolution and feminism and created communism, if you're going to say all these critical things about Jewish people, well, we know what happened the last time a large group of people criticized Jews. You all know what I'm talking about, the Holocaust. And you know what the details of the Holocaust are, right? Well, maybe you need to tour one of the Holocaust memorial museums, of which there are 100 plus of them. You need to remember that the last time somebody was critical of Jews, 6 million of them died. And they were tortured in all these barbarous ways. And so, for example, if they
make it out like guys like you and me just having this conversation, Josh, are like secretly building like an underground concentration camp in our backyard or something, like almost like there's actual political power behind this Jew hatred. It's the opposite is true. The moment that you question anything, you lose so much social clout, so much like clout politically and otherwise, monetarily in the case of people getting their bank accounts frozen. But they pretend as though like just behind every tree, there's some kind of concentration camp that nobody knows about. It's mind-boggling, the stupidity and the way that they rely on, I think, the mainstream person's ignorance on this whole thing.
Well, the unfortunate fact is they have such leverage over the education system that they control the body of knowledge that the average person has in America. Yeah. If you control the media and you control the education, you get to sculpt, as I said, the body of knowledge that sits inside of all of our brains. And so, for example, the Holocaust, let's just say it was true that 6 million Jews died. and they died in all these cruel and awful ways. Was that the worst event in human history? Was that the worst event in the last 100 years? No, it wasn't. There's something called the Holodomor, where you have tens of millions of dead European people who died as a direct result of communism. And if you pull back the thread on communism and figure out who created this, who were Stalin, Lenin, Trotsky, Marx, who were these people? Where did they get their beliefs? They're Jews, or they got their beliefs from Jews. And so you have this other historical event where far more people died, white Europeans primarily, at the hands of Jewish ideologies. And they say, yeah, let's just not educate the youth about that. I mean, how many people watching this stream had you ever even heard the word Holodomor before? Much less knew the details about how many people died, how they died, who created the movement behind it that caused it.
Yep. I'm actually shocked that Wikipedia even has a. I'm surprised it's not earmarked by saying an alt-right conspiracy theory. It actually does give it the dignity of having even though they're just calling it, like, they're making it about the famine, which was a real thing against Ukraine, but they do give it a page. I'm surprised.
They do. The death toll numbers that they report, I think they say are amusingly less than 6 million. It has to be less than 6 million.
Oh yeah, 3.5 to 5 million. It had to be just under, right?
Right, exactly. But
somehow,
if you look at what I mentioned earlier, that's where that becomes relevant, that you have to understand the Wikipedia articles that you trust to be factually true, they're all groomed and maintained by pro-Jewish people. I mean, they literally pay full-time employees to sit there and make sure the Holocaust is the most well-known and focused on historical event in the last 100 years, which is just wrong. Once again, it's just morally wrong to say that the bad things that have happened to Jews are more important, and we should try to rearrange all of society, the way we speak to each other, what subjects we're allowed to discuss, whether or not we're allowed to criticize their religion.
Yeah.
Which is just, that is unacceptable. We are Christians. We believe that Jesus Christ is God. And we believe that every other religion, by default, by definition of John 14:6, no other way to the Father except through me. Every other religion, this isn't calling out Judaism. This is saying Hinduism, Buddhism, Sikhism, paganism. They are all various machinations and deceptions of Satan. So Judaism is on the table for all Christians everywhere to say that is a satanic religion. Whatever they think they are worshiping as God is not God. And in fact, when you dig into their doctrine, like we talked about earlier in the show, they have some very disgusting beliefs about Jesus Christ. And so to criticize Jewish people, their religion, the things they've done in history, that should be on the table and freely discussed as much as everybody else. But that is not what has happened. That is the opposite of what has happened.
And there are a few major conservative Christians, conservative is probably the wrong word because I'm going historical and international here, that have seen what you and I are seeing, especially you go back over 100 years ago, it's pretty adamant, like where a lot of these people stood on the Jewish religion post-temple Judaism, like you were discussing, and more of rabbinic Judaism, which is the oral traditions, the Talmud and other things. But, a person such as Billy Graham called it out very clearly with Richard Nixon on the phone. And then 20 years later, when those tapes were released by I believe it was the Nixon Library, he was so embarrassed. And I hate to say it about Billy Graham, but he denied to remember. He said, I don't remember ever saying that. Obviously I did. I apologize. And there was this huge apology. And the Christian community, because he's such a influential, powerful historical figure in modern day evangelical Christianity, they kind of swept it under the rug and never talked about it. It was really interesting the way that happened. Whereas if he had been calling out LGBTQ or something, which I'm sure he did, but in a way that would have been appetizing to the left would have been all over it, just blasting that out. But because it happened to be about the Jews in so-called the latter days, as he discussed it, when he said they're now in the latter days a synagogue of Satan, most of the religious deceptions, Richard, are going to come from this group of people. He said it out loud on tape, and it just basically went away, and then when it did come out a little bit, he apologized, and that was the last it was ever heard of.
Yeah, inevitably, the apology tour is what happens whenever you're a well-known, influential person.
Yeah.
And you decide to speak about this subject using your platform. Then, if you survive, as JFK did not when he was critical of the nation of Israel, if you survive and you want to continue having a job and being influential in society, you saw this happen with Elon Musk. You saw this happen with Kanye West. You saw it happen with Kyrie Irving, the NBA player. You see this happen with Dave Chappelle. If you have any voice at all,
did
and you
Chappelle apologize?
He used comedy to say basically. He didn't explicitly apologize, but he didn't go anywhere near as aggressively as the others did.
Right. Okay.
He's still getting Netflix series, so there's something going on with Chappelle that's a little bit different. But he absolutely did invoke some ADL kind of people coming after him when they talked about him. Yeah, what he said on his little monologue was, if it's Italians manipulating money and using thug tactics to influence people, it's a mob.
Yep.
If it's black people who are running around intimidating people, using violence to manipulate things, it's a gang. When it's Jews, you're not supposed to talk about it.
It's a coincidence.
And
you don't ever talk about it.
Right. And so naturally, the Jewish community did not think that that was funny. And they came after him and they said, maybe we should all think about canceling our Netflix subscriptions. And when Elon Musk bought Twitter and he said, hey, free speech is free speech. If you want to criticize Christianity, if you want to criticize Judaism, if you want to criticize Israel or Russia, free speech is free speech. I'm going to pay $50 million to buy this technology platform to make sure people can just have open discussions. Within weeks of him doing this, the ADL, Southern Poverty Law Center, and others formed a boycott that said all of the advertisers who represent like 90+% of Twitter's revenue, meaning the company cannot function without advertisers. Well, the ADL and all these other Jewish watchdog groups came on there and said, McDonald's, Coca-Cola, Ford Motor Company, Adidas, you all need to pull your advertising from Twitter if Elon Musk is going to allow people to talk about Jewish people any way they want. That is unacceptable. It's like, who said you get this level of authority over a constitutionally protected right of Americans of freedom of speech?
Yeah.
And so it's like, even if you are the richest person in the world, so, okay, he goes out, he buys Twitter, they do this advertising boycott, their revenue gets crippled in North America. They then require Elon Musk to go to Auschwitz with Ben Shapiro and wear the little yarmulke and look at the Holocaust Museum and do the apology tour. And you have Elon Musk getting on a Twitter space and saying that he is a philo-Semitic, not an anti-Semitic. He's a philo-Semitic. He loves Jewish people. He even said, I could practically be Jewish myself. And it's like, this should not be what's required to do simple things such as protect freedom of speech. And Elon is no Christian. Elon is no white advocate. He's just saying, in America, we have a constitution. The constitution says you're allowed to talk about whatever you want, right? So he's not a white supremacist. He's not a Christo-fascist. Yeah. Yet they're over here causing him tens of millions of dollars of financial harm. They're smearing him as somebody who's platforming anti-Semitism. They're forcing him to come to Israel and do the atrocity propaganda tour. Kanye West, he says Jewish people run the media and they run the music industry. Well, what happens to him after that? He loses $1.5 billion. He loses his Adidas contract. He loses his Gap contract. The talent agencies will no longer work with him. And until he goes on and posts a freaking tweet in Hebrew apologizing for his behavior, he can't get his samples in the music that he creates that are all going through the recording industry. He can't get his samples approved to release his next album unless he apologizes to the Jews. And this is after they ruined 75% of his wealth, $1.5 billion.
Yeah.
And it's because he said Jewish people run the music industry, which is empirically true. You have Jewish people bragging about this in the newspaper, various YouTube videos. It's not hard to find. They talk about how they dominate the music industry. So it's like the things that they boast and brag about themselves when they call themselves God's chosen people.
Yeah.
Their race, their religion is the chosen one of God. If you point that out and say, like, isn't that kind of like xenophobic in and of itself, where you say everybody else is not chosen by God, that their blood is not equal to yours, that they don't have the same level of rights as you do? They're just not willing to hear these arguments. They would rather shut down the entire conversation, call you an anti-Semite, and try to destroy your career and your reputation and so on. And there's so many of us that are just sick of this.
We are. And the truth is, it's just that once your eyes are even a little bit open to this whole thing, it becomes so obvious. It's kind of silly, and it's kind of sickening. It can be maddening. But you can also I think the best way is to laugh about it, and to, like, there's this one video that you posted, and I love it. It's this, you can tell, just total like American white dude interviewing some guy. I mean, it's all a setup. It's a skit. But then there's this Jewish guy sitting there with him, and he's talking about how, he donated some number of $1 million to Holocaust awareness. And the white guy's like, thank you. That's great. He's like, do you support Holocaust awareness? He's like, I mean, I would. Hadn't really thought about it. And it's just like, they get in this whole dialogue. I think that's one of the best ways, is to use humor rather than anger or fear, or any of those things. Because that's not, I mean, there's a time for anger, but that's not really helping anybody. But I say all that just because I think the problems are so obvious, and the way people won't talk about it is so obvious. And I'm going to give one example. So Dennis Prager has entire PragerU videos about the evils of the ADL and of the, what's the other one you mentioned? The Southern Poverty Law. Yes. Entire videos about it. He's even got a video about how Jewish people became revolutionaries and the kings of the isms, communism, socialism, feminism, post Christ, that once their temple in 70 AD was destroyed. I mean, Prager does a whole video on this. He's like, unfortunately, we left the religion and we became more about social revolution. But yet, when you try to bring up the fact that the ADL and the Southern Poverty Law Center and YouTube and Facebook and Meta in general, and all of these are ran. I don't mean just in a small way. I mean, like, the CEOs are either dual citizen or strong Israeli or Jewish themselves or whatever. Like, the conversation shuts down. And that was one of the biggest eye openers for me, is all of these people that seem to be fighting the right things. To bring this back full circle to my original opening monologue of what I was seeing, like, they're willing to fight it and make a big public show about they're fighting the woke or the open borders or the ADL or whatever. But if you bring up the fact that these shows shows being the open border and the ADL and all that are ran by Jewish interests, it's like all of a sudden you become this far right neo-Nazi or they want to label you as a leftist, like foot soldier, like a Soros funded foot soldier, which that's a whole nother can of worms. And they won't even allow the conversation to be had. You and I have had a very, I think, rational, logical conversation with factual things. You've said, fact check me many times, and people can. But yet, the biggest names in conservative media, I mean, if Glenn Beck were to watch this show, he would watch the first 5 minutes of it and say, I'm shutting that down. Nobody should watch this. Don't watch it. And by the way, let's have Bibi Netanyahu next week on Blaze TV. Everybody tune in. That's where it goes. And then you realize, okay, there's something they're not telling us. There's a reason why the best ideas with the smartest people in America continue to lose. And it's because they have chosen to not face a problem, and I'm amazed by it, but I also think that humor's got to be used in approaching this.
Yeah, humor is a great disarming tactic on any kind of conversation, any kind of confrontational subject.
Yeah.
And, maybe I'm guilty of not utilizing enough humor in my stuff. I try to go from a very calm, let me lay out the rational case for this. Let me point out the double standards that exist. I think that's one of the most powerful tactics, is keeping calm and simply expressing the double standards that are held to white people, Christians, Americans, Europeans, that are not held to Jewish people specifically, but virtually anybody else in the world. We don't even hold Asian people to the same standards that we hold white Christians. We don't hold Africans to the same standards, or Indians or anybody else. They have created this entirely different morality that white people must live under, especially white Christians. And it's hard to make jokes about it. It's very easy to point out the double standard, though. So that's kind of my specialty.
But you saw in the HodgeTwins with Nick Fuentes, what I loved about that show was it was funny, man. Like they were telling the truth, but they're laughing the whole time, man. You know, and I think that takes practice. And a guy like Fuentes, you know, he's been, like you told me on the phone the other day, you're like, Jeremy, the reason he's smart. But part of the reason he's such a leader in this movement, is so articulate, is because it's all he's done is focus on this issue for like 5+ years. So anybody that spends 5 years of their life focusing on one issue is going to be pretty darn sharp about it. Right. And at that point you hear, I've heard this before, that humor is like the highest intelligence on any given subject. Like once you can be funny about it, well, it's a matter of time. You know, and I think guys like you and me, we're still in the process. I mean, I think you're further along than me on the facts and figures and logic, but the sooner that we can write songs about it and make it funny and, you know, joke with people, I think the better, because people need to see the humanity in us in this conversation. And when I say us, I don't just mean Joshua and Jeremy. I mean Candace Owens and, you know, anybody else that's involved with it. And that's where I want to go next on this, Joshua, is like, there is a movement going on. It's bigger than one guy, Fuentes, and a couple guys like you and me. There's some major players out there, the HodgeTwins and many others that are in media, in academia, and other places. Let's talk about that for a minute. Who are the big players in this thing, and where's it going? Because there's a conflict between us and obviously mainstream evangelical Christian Zionists and mainstream media Christian conservatism.
So some of the big players, I want to talk more about Candace Owens, because she's probably the most prominent, especially having been working for Daily Wire for Ben Shapiro, for a Jewish devoted platform, a kind of a crypto Jewish platform. They don't promote themselves as here to protect Israel and protect Judaism and the Jewish people.
She worked for Dennis Prager before.
Right. And I think she has some involvement with Turning Point as well. She's close friends with Charlie Kirk. So
used to be.
Yeah, well, that's what happens when you choose to be honest.
Yeah.
So I think it was actually the next to last episode she ever did while she was still underneath the Daily Wire was a 2-hour-long, I believe, interview with a guy named Rabbi Barclay. And the backstory was that over the last multiple years, there was a different rabbi named Rabbi Shmuley, who a lot of people recognize, who had been harassing Candace about several of her statements when it came to her Christianity and recently conversion to Catholicism. And so her and Rabbi Barclay kind of get into this back and forth about, why is it that you seem to believe that your religion trumps my religion? And your religion is the one where you have alleged rabbis, people who should be considered faith leaders in their community, operating sex toy stores with their daughter. And I'm sorry, but we as Christians think it's just wrong for people to be doing that and representing themselves as faith leaders, religious leaders in their community. Your religion, even if it does believe that selling sex toys and doing so with your daughter and stuff, if your culture believes that's fine, that's fine. But you have to respect the fact that I'm a Christian and we don't approve of that. Her exact quote was, your religion does not trump my religion. Mm-hmm. And within 1 week, she was fired from Daily Wire.
Yep.
And it's like, okay, saw that coming. And This is the affirmation that people will eventually come to. It is inevitable. If you just keep your ears open and your eyeballs straight ahead, the next time somebody comes out against Israel, against Jewish people, whatever, see what happens to them. See what happens in the ensuing weeks. There's going to be a cancellation campaign. Their reputation is going to be attacked. They're likely going to lose their job. They're going to have to issue an apology if they want to continue or try to recuperate those things. Otherwise, they're going to get cast into being an outcast on the outskirts of the internet, exactly like Nick Fuentes, who had to build his own streaming platform because nobody would allow him to stream on their website. And other people involved, just like earlier this week, I saw Dan Blitzerian being vocal about his disapproval of the nation of Israel. He's a retired military guy. So, he's fully aware of the Middle Eastern conflicts that the American people have been drugged through for the last several decades. And he made some unambiguous statements on Instagram and Twitter about his feelings about Israel. And he's talking to his own audience of multiple millions of followers. And it's not to say Dan Blitzerian is the model Christian. He's obviously not. He lives a very hedonistic lifestyle. But the point is, people with tens of millions of followers and listeners are starting to, for the first time, hear that you can be critical of Israel, or the Jews, so to speak, and survive. Candace Owens is still alive. She has repositioned herself. She has her own little outlet now on X, and she's been dropping bombs ever since then.
Do you think there's something?
And the reason why,
let me ask you a quick question on that. Whether it's Dan Bilzerian or Candace Owens or many, even yourself, Joshua, sometimes the people that didn't grow up in it, didn't grow up in the Christian Zionist faith, because even Dan Bilzerian, as hedonistic as he is, and I don't encourage people to follow him on Instagram or whatever because it's totally hedonistic, but I've seen some things in stuff he said about, like, he's like, after all that I've done, kind of like the prodigal son, like, after all that I've done out there in the world and with women, like, I would kind of rather just be married with a family. I've seen him say that recently, right? Mm-hmm. So you get these people like Candace Owens is not a lifelong Christian. She's not. Right. I think her faith is less than a decade old. Your faith is 5-6 years old in terms of you coming to Christ, right? So there's a freshness to it, and there's an open-eyed innocence to it that if you grow up in it and you're told from the time you're a small child that the Jews are God's chosen people and the nation of Israel can do no wrong, don't ever question them and don't look into the history too much. Like, that seeps into your core, whereas these people are fresher to their faith and they're looking at it with open, innocent eyes. Do you think that's playing a role in who is willing to talk about these things honestly?
Oh, 100%. Yeah, 100%. This revolution where we get back to basic Christian precepts that say, if you don't acknowledge Jesus Christ is God, you are not within the fold. It doesn't matter if you believe some of the things in the Old Testament. It doesn't matter if you believe that in the cow god or whatever it is that Hindus are doing. It doesn't matter if you believe in 1,000 gods. They're all in the same category of, you have rejected the only real identity and the only real relationship with God. And when people grew up in the church, especially the Christian Zionist wave that has occurred post Schofield Bible, I can never say that right.
Schofield, yep.
If that's what you grew up in as a cradle Christian, where you were continuously being indoctrinated with the message that you have to bless Israel, God blesses those who bless Israel, and God will destroy those who don't support Israel, then, and especially when all your peers believe the same thing and all the authority figures in your life believe the same thing, and that's just been true for decades, it's going to be very hard to essentially escape that matrix of thought. In the same way we had to escape the matrix of mainstream conservatism, I had to escape the matrix of just trusting my government, that they typically do what's best for all of us. Yeah. Escaping this idea that modern Israel, the nation secular state of Israel, is the same thing as the ancient Israel in the Old Testament, that's a matrix of thought that requires several connected beliefs and interpretations of Scripture. Bastardized Scripture. So to break out of any matrix, it does require repeated exposure to counter narratives. The same thing of trying to escape the matrix of what we call racism, the preference over one ethnic culture over another. We were all pounded from the day we started attending kindergarten that you cannot think that way. You cannot think about preferring your own people. You cannot think about the Jews in this way. You cannot think about homosexuality in a certain way. So escaping those preformed preconceptions about these subjects, it does require an open mind and an objective look at the facts. And those things accumulate over time, and people have to be shown that it's safe to do so. I mean, I know a lot of people, including Christians, who are very scared and timid still to condemn homosexuality. Mm-hmm. I mean, this is just like a baseline understood. The Scripture couldn't be any more clear about how God feels about that behavior. And they are still so worried about what their friends will think, what their employer will think, that they just cannot escape that way of thinking.
I mean, I remember early on, just give a personal example, when all the stuff with BLM was really getting hot, and maybe even right before the George Floyd thing, even though I was considering starting my own conservative, what I would have called America First, not as naive as I was, platform, I remember being so scared to even put a meme out or to put some simple little thing talking about, how all of that is a sham. The BLM is a sham. It's a leftist scheme, whatever. So, but the thing is, you begin to do it in small ways, and it's just like a muscle. Like courage is like a muscle. The more you do it, the more that muscle grows, the stronger you get. And then pretty soon you're doing videos like we're doing right now.
I have to give you an anecdote about this. I've been wanting to try to document or talk about a very amusing experience in my life that goes all the way back to childhood, talking 12, 13 years old. I got my very first desktop PC. I'm on the early days internet. So this is 20 plus years ago. I don't know how I got there, but somehow I ended up on a website called Storming the Base, which I doubt anybody watching this has heard of. But essentially it was a white identity website, and it had a lot of stuff about World War II, the Holocaust, the Jews, stuff like that. And I'm looking at this stuff as a very young man, and I stumbled upon it. I didn't go looking like, hey, what's some alternative explanations about history? I don't know how I ended up there, but I found it. And I was petrified. I was like, dude, I'm not joking when I say I actually thought I might need to throw away my computer because there was going to be a digital paper trail that I visited this website that questioned the Holocaust or some of the details of the Holocaust. It truly
scared you, right?
No, I was like, what if my mom finds out? What if the government finds out that I looked at this information? What's going to happen to me? Do I need to destroy the evidence that I looked at this website?
You would have been like, preferably like caught looking at porn, like publicly, then.
And I mean, the sad thing is that's still true for full-fledged adults today.
Yeah.
I mean, there are adults, especially people if you work in the government or in any kind of public-facing role, if you're found to be looking at that kind of content, looking at Nick Fuentes' content, what was her name? Gosh, what's the not very attractive woman? Marjorie Taylor Greene. She attended one of Nick Fuentes'.
Hey, she's in shape though, man. She does videos doing power cleans. Give her a little credit now. She's working hard.
Yeah, very feminine woman. So she attended one of Nick's early conferences, and she immediately found out how bad that was for her public reputation, and she had to go and renounce her relationship with Nick, say, I do not believe anything Nick believes. And so this continues to this day, that 20 years later, people still have this hypochondriac fear of even dipping the smallest toe in the waters of being critical of Jewish people or trying to protect white people. That's not healthy. Especially as Christians, we should be rebuking every other religion in the world. And as white people whose ancestors are white, who built this country with a specific set of governmental practices, religious affiliation, education methods that are actually based on the Bible, not the Quran, not science idolatry, we should say we liked the way we did that and we should try to preserve that. Another good example, so this is me back when I was 12 years old, petrified, never looked at this information again for 20 years. So then COVID happens. I'm starting to figure out there's some sketchy stuff going on with censorship and these specific ideas being so taboo. I stumble upon an Instagram account. And this is back when my account has only been political ever since COVID. Before that, for 7 years, 6 or 7 years on social media, my account was a bodybuilding account. I wasn't even Christian for half of its existence for the first 5 years. So all I was ever doing was saying, hey, I'm bulking, I'm cutting, here's my diet, the least controversial crap ever. Well, I stumbled upon this account called Trad West. I didn't even know what those words meant, but I looked at the content and it was motivating and it was strong men embracing masculinity. But I noticed a common theme, and the common theme was they were all wearing a cross. the Crusader cross, the bold red Crusader
Mm-hmm.
cross. And I was like, ew, this feels a little kind of white supremacy, like what's up with these guys being so insistent about their European heritage? I liked what I was looking at. It was motivational. And I think people should have aspirational goals to live up to their ancestors and to preserve whatever they were doing, believing, if assuming you agree with them. And I do agree that the Roman people built great civilizations. The Greek people built great civilizations. And so the funny thing was, though, I was scared to follow an Instagram account. I was scared to like a post because it loosely referred to Christian identity and white identity.
Mm-hmm.
That is not right. You should not be scared to like a post on social media that praises your ancestors and says Christianity must be the law of the land. But I was thinking, what would happen if my employer saw that I liked this post that says America needs to be a majority European country? What would happen to me then?
Yeah.
Well, we know what happens to politicians and public-facing people. It's like some journalist goes and looks at all of their Twitter account and they see, ooh, you liked this post by Nick Fuentes where he talked about white identity or Christian nationalism. Their reputation's destroyed, their career is ended. And so that was a big red pill moment for me, an epiphany, a light bulb where it said, for 20 plus freaking years of my life, I have been scared to look at information that is true, objectively true. If you like the civilizations that these people built, that's not wrong. And if you're a Christian who says Christianity is the only real religion that even exists, that's also not wrong. But I was scared. And I think that's the position that a lot of people are still in. They don't want to watch Nick's show because what if somebody found out they watched Nick's show? Maybe you don't even agree with everything that he says. He has some views about women and views about minorities and all kinds of stuff. It's okay for you to agree with something somebody says, like me or like Jeremy, and not wholeheartedly agree with everything they say. But what we shouldn't be doing is saying, you are not allowed to speak. You cannot share your opinions publicly because you liked a post, because you followed a certain person, or even because you said something that you care about out loud. You can no longer participate in society. This is cancel culture. That's the general topic. But once again, as you pull back the curtain and you see, okay, cancel culture is obviously a problem. There's clearly subjects that you get punished for talking about. Mm-hmm. Who is actually hitting the buttons, so to speak? Who's controlling the keyboard of cancel culture? Oh, well, it's the ADL and it's Media Matters and it's these George Soros-funded NGOs who are sitting there squatting Nick Fuentes' stream, trying to clip out a 30-second segment out of context where he says something about Jewish people that could be interpreted as hateful. They'll leave out the fact that later on in the episode, he says, I don't hate Jewish people. I don't hate black people. I don't hate Hispanics. But what I am is America first. And America means something. It is a particular people and it is a particular faith. And so that's what I'm out here trying to advocate for and protect. But the censorship engine has existed for so long. We've made a lot of progress in the last year, 2 years with what Elon did, and it's getting better and better. And with brave people like Candace Owens going out there, with like brave people as crazy as you might think he is for saying some of the things that he said. I didn't mention earlier Kanye. I said, well, he got canceled because he said the Jews run the media, the Jews run the music industry and so on. He said some other things too, and Jews would be quick to point this out. They would say he went on Alex Jones's show and he said he loved Hitler. Okay, that's a pretty controversial statement, and I didn't intentionally leave that out earlier. I'm saying that out loud now because I want people to know, full disclosure, the truth. These are the things that he said. But you don't have to love Hitler to agree with the other things that he said. And the other things that he said were Zionism is a problem for America. It's a conflict of interest. Jewish people placing their religion or their ethnic loyalty or their national loyalty to Israel above America is a conflict of interest. You can agree with that without agreeing that Hitler is awesome, right? But the problem is they just said, because you said Hitler is awesome, that's going to cost you $1.5 billion and you're ruined in public for the rest of your life.
Yeah. I could park it anywhere on a lot of the things that you said. I originally had asked the question about where's this all going? Where's it headed? Because you got more and more. There's a wave that's building of people who are beginning to notice. They're beginning to see the things we're seeing. But it's a lot of random people out there kind of plucked from the mainstream of mostly right-wing conservatism that are willing to take the hits and willing to have, as we talked about on the phone, the courage, if they have a platform at all, to speak out about it. Now let's compare something. Only 4 to 5 years ago, the medical industry and the doctors in America and the CDC would have been seen as one of the most highly trusted. I think the trust level among the medical profession, generally speaking, was at a high compared to law enforcement, compared to pastors in America. I've seen all the stats. The medical industry was way up there in terms of trust. Now it's way down. And that only happened in a few years as people noticed and they began to get brave enough on their keyboards to write, I don't trust the CDC anymore, or whatever they wrote, or the story we're being told is not true. And they said that in defiance of even their local doctor that maybe they knew, liked, trusted, and respected, but they were willing to go so far to piss him off to say, I'm not going to vaccinate my kids with this thing. I don't believe in it, right? So there was a wave that built, and now on the back end, now hindsight, it doesn't matter anymore because we already went through it, which I hope that's not the case in this new wave. But now, like, people are just calling out all the news pundits and the doctors and the WHO to the CDC. You know where this is going, to where like the trust is way down. We're not going to get fooled, I don't think, by the same kind of pandemic again, unless it's a deadly virus that kills kids. Then people may fall for it because the cost is so high, they'll be willing to do anything. But there's a similar thing happening where people are getting bold enough to actually write down like, hey, I read the Talmud. I can't believe it. Why wasn't I told this, Pastor, ever? People are willing to say some of these things. Do you think that there's a similar wave break that's going to happen like it's happened with COVID in the medical industry, where now, like maybe in 2 years from now, it's going to be far more mainstream to have the kind of conversations that we're having?
There's so many conversations that need to be had. This one specifically about the Jewish people's influence in our country, and that's not even one subject. It's a bunch of subjects. The one that's on my mind probably the most right now for this little sliver of the next how many months until November? We're in June, July, August, September, October, November. So the next 6 months up to the election, I think there is a general sense of disenfranchisement across everybody when it comes to election integrity, whether or not these politicians are even loyal to the American people, if they're not bought off by a foreign nation, if the elections even matter. Like when I go out and to the ballot box, I put my vote in there, does it even matter at all? And what I worry about is many, many people are coming to find out that there's actually a pretty high probability that it doesn't. Because the games these people are playing at the national election level, we saw this through COVID and the games they played with mail-in ballots.
Yeah.
They manipulated a presidential election to place the president they wanted to win in the role.
Yeah.
And so when I see what's happening with Donald Trump and the witch hunt that's been unfolding over the last year, starts with Mar-a-Lago, then it goes to the charges when he received them. They book him at the jail. They take the mugshot, the infamous mugshot. Then they drag him through.
Honestly, it goes way before that. It started with the Russian collusion and the 3 or 4 impeachments. Like it never, which is again, like I don't mean to cut you off, but all of it's just like never ending. And I'm just bored with it, to be honest with you. I mean, it's just like, because I hear what he has to say about these topics we've been discussing, and it's like he's just right along the mainstream. He's not even, I mean, even his top donors, the Adelson family, Miriam Adelson, and I can't remember the deceased husband or whatever. Sheldon Adelson, $100 million to his campaign. They've promised more than ever to the next one. I mean, he's a Zionist of Zionists, unless he's playing 5D chess or something. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, the fundamental problem that I'm seeing revealed to me, which I didn't even believe a year ago, I thought still like, okay, they just kind of gamed the votes and that's how they won the election. Maybe they're not necessarily like just flat out ignoring the best interest of the country. With the Trump thing, if people are familiar with Hegelian dialectics, where they essentially create a problem and then they serve up on a silver platter the solution to that problem, but it's packaged with something that they're not revealing to you, that is precisely what's happening with Donald Trump. They put Biden in office, who is on the left side, the Democrat side, the progressive side, whatever you want to call it, which comes with a set of policies. One of those policies is open borders. And wokeism, meaning we're going to legalize gay marriage and transgenderism is going to be celebrated. Trannies are going to be flashing their tits on the White House lawn. It's a complete freak show.
True story.
Yeah, that's not hyperbole. That actually happened. The Los Angeles Dodgers are going to call the Church of Satan to throw out the first pitch of the season. I mean, it's a downward spiral that is happening very fast, and it's allowed because the people we have placed in charge of our federal government are advocating for it. They're not just allowing it, they're promoting it and saying this is a good thing. We should have open borders and we should have complete religious tolerance. We should have pride parades in the street everywhere. So they serve up that, and we have to endure 4 years of that. And they say, okay, but look, this is the proof that democracy is real. You know, Trump, who served as president from 2016 to 2020, we're actually going to let the American people vote back into office this guy who allegedly a large portion of the country hated because he was so unpolitically correct. And he was xenophobic. He was Islamophobic. Look, democracy is real because we're going to let that mean, hateful, bigoted Donald Trump guy back into office. You should believe that this whole voting thing, representative democracy, that it's totally real because we let Mr. Unpopular back into office. Mm-hmm. So we're supposed to accept that this slowly accumulating embracing of Donald Trump that we have kind of come to realize, you know, maybe he wasn't so bad. Maybe this immigration thing actually matters. Maybe the complete abandonment of Christian morality when it comes to sexual relations, maybe that's not a good thing. And so if Trump represents the fix for all of these problems, the fact that we are allowed to vote for him, put him back into office, is supposed to represent the reassurance that everything is working as it is supposed to. Yep. Democracy is real. Everybody gets to go to sleep in 2024 after November. Okay, our country's actually not as corrupt.
Conservative Inc. and even some of the alt conservative media has been totally like, wow, like now that whole meme of like, you've got Mel Gibson as a young man. This is me voting in 2016 for Donald Trump. Then 2020, it's like him and the Patriot carrying the flag. And now it's Braveheart with the face paint and the blood. Just like, screaming like, this is how I'm going to vote. And it's like, yeah, vote harder. But these are the same people that will acknowledge the election was stolen. And the people that have the power, you know, potentially to stop a stolen election have only gotten weaker, or they're not even in power at all anymore. But yet we're pretending like if we just vote harder, that everything will be made right once we get Donald Trump back in office. And I'm lending credibility to your argument. It's almost like the perfect thing for them, because the genie's been coming out of the bottle in terms of this right-left dynamic is a big fraud at this point. It's a fake. It's controlled by the same people. But getting him convicted guilty on 34 felony counts, like now he seems like, wow, like and it even happened for about one day. I was kind of like, man, maybe it is real. Maybe it is real.
I see what you did there. Well, it's definitely is real. It's definitely real. But I mean, that's not a pun. That's the truth. As you mentioned, Donald Trump is receiving $100 million from, what's the woman's name?
Miriam Adelson.
Yeah.
She said more. She said more this time than ever before. So totally, they've done 200 million total, and they're going to do more this time.
Yeah. So, and a lot of the things that people don't talk about with Trump, there's a guy named Father something Kapner, who's a Eastern Orthodox bishop, who talked about some of the lesser known compromises and conflicts of interest of Donald Trump that are just not talked about.
Brother Nathaniel.
Brother Nathaniel Kapner. That's right. Yeah. He talked about some of how Donald Trump's backstory, if we just pause and rewind, how did this guy become a billionaire? he became a billionaire through the New York City real estate empire that largely he inherited from his father. He grew it from that and so on. But if you know about the real estate business, you understand that it's largely based on leverage. It's based on debt. It's based on taking on huge loans that come with interest and trying to capitalize on those loans. But in the meantime, all of those loans do carry an interest rate. And so if your entire wealth, your entire life's creation is tied up in loans that Jewish people control, because they do control all of the trillionaire asset manager class, then Donald Trump can't come out and say, Jewish people have used usury to control populations for thousands of years. It's a problem. We need to get rid of it. That's just factually true. That's one of the reasons why they got evicted from 100 plus countries. Well, Donald Trump's not going to do that. Donald Trump is not going to say, hey, the hundreds of millions of dollars of loans that I have to control my real estate empire, if I am vocally critical about these people, they're going to say, well, your interest rate just went from 2.5% to 25%. And all of your wealth and fame and status and influence, it goes away. This happened to Henry Ford. You know, Henry Ford is a great American icon who talked about these things, who was open. And if you go to his website or go to his Wikipedia, guess what it'll say about him? Known anti-Semite, Henry Ford.
Yeah.
And these are the tactics that they use that the average individual, unless you're really going deep into the receipts about where did these people's money come from? Where did their success come from? Who stood them up and allowed them to become celebrities? Who gave them their influence? In the case of his political success, it's the Adelson family. And his ties to Israel, obviously his family, his children are married into the Jewish faith. And so there's so many compromises with Donald Trump as an individual, compromises directly tied to the nation of Israel and Jewish people, that we already know he's not going to be the guy who comes out and
it goes even deeper. I mean, Jared Kushner's wife, Ivanka, right? They go and pray at Rabbi Schneerson's grave, like go and pray, like who was known as the Messiah among the Chabad Lubavitchers, which is the most Talmudic sect. Talk about the whole, like, you know, the Goy and the Gentiles have different souls. This would have been that guy, Rabbi Schneerson. And they go and pray at his grave to try to get his, you know, from the grave powers to help Donald Trump become president again. Like it's insane, the kind of like compromise that we're seeing here on that level with his family.
Yeah, I mean, this hit me hard a couple of months ago where I was like, they did this on purpose. They made us beg for an Israel first president.
Yes.
They opened our borders. They allowed all of this transsexual, LGBT, blah, 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 blah. They did that on purpose to make us beg for this guy who's going to put a Band-Aid on those problems, but he's keeping the back door open for Israel to run our entire country. Everything. He's signing anti-Semitism bills to make anti-Semitism illegal. It's already illegal in 37 states to boycott the nation of Israel. It's not illegal to boycott our own country. It's not illegal to boycott Russia or anybody else. But if you say, as a citizen of the United States of America in 37 different states, hey, I don't like Israel's relationship with America. I feel like they're meddling in our elections. I feel like they're meddling in our military endeavors. I certainly don't agree with their religious faith because I'm a Christian. I don't want to support Israeli goods or Israeli businesses. That's illegal in 37 states. That alone should make us all pause and say, what do you mean? Like, I'm an American. I'm allowed to say whatever the fuck I want about any country in the world. If anything, if there were ever a country that you probably shouldn't be tearing down in public, maybe it's your own, because that's kind of counterproductive.
Yeah.
But thanks to freedom of speech, and we need to be able to criticize our own country. So I'm glad that that's not illegal. But it's just ironic is what I'm pointing out.
Yeah.
You can tear down your own country and you can say, burn this whole place down. Don't buy American goods.
And people do.
Don't support America. But the moment you say this about a foreign nation who worships the Antichrist, that's when you've put yourself in legal trouble. To make matters worse, that's boycotting Israel. Very recently, and Nick has been talking about this on his show, following it very closely, the anti-Semitism laws that they are trying to pass right now on college campuses, where obviously there's all these pro-Palestine protests at Columbia, Harvard, Yale, all the Ivy Leagues. They've even spilled over into the greater higher education system. They're making that illegal. So if you're a college student and you want to go and put your signs up and say, I don't support what's going on, 40,000 dead civilians in Palestine, I don't support ethnic cleansing in Gaza, those seem like okay things to talk about. People have been protesting wars on college campuses ever since America has existed. But now it's illegal. And it's not illegal for protesting Ukraine and Russia, whatever side you're on with that. Yeah. It's not illegal to go and protest intervening with Taiwan and China. It is illegal to go and protest what Israel is doing.
Yeah.
So it's
or how it could become that way. The bills aren't fully passed.
Right. They're trying to get this done. It just goes to show, why are there people in the American government actively trying to make it illegal for American citizens to protest or to disagree with a foreign nation? That is fundamentally wrong. And I don't think anybody, no matter how much they love Jews or Israel, they should be able to objectively and rationally think this through, that these things are wrong. And after they come to that conclusion, they should try to go to the next level and say, who are the people who are trying to do these wrong things? They might come to an agreement with you and me and say, yeah, those laws, I get it, okay? We're a country of freedom of speech. Has nothing to do with Israel, has nothing to do with the Jews. We're a country of freedom of speech. We shouldn't be passing laws like that. Yeah. That's great that some people might come to that agreement, but that's not enough. You should look at the people who are trying to force these laws on us and try to say, we shouldn't have people like that running our country.
Yeah, 100%. Well, there were three different men, and I want to make this my closing question. Hopefully, answer honestly, but I hope we can end on a positive note. But three different people, two of them directly to me, one of them indirectly through his show, being Nick Fuentes, said some things that I'd like you to counter if you can. How do I put that? So one was a business associate who came to me, and he's aware of all these things we're talking about. He's like, hey man, I just feel like I need to become as close as I can to the Lord, because I think Russia is going to nuke us. It was a very kind of, this is probably what's going to happen based on what Biden's doing and how that, yada, yada. Right. And he would be like an America first kind of guy. All right. Second, you've got Nick Fuentes on one of his recent shows talking about how he thinks he's like, the Republic is over. Like all the things are and it might've been just a really negative moment for him where he was really angry about the stuff that happened to Trump. And he was seeing some of the same compromises Trump has made. And he was like, the ship has sailed, the Republic's over. So, and I forget who the third one was. So just those two, right? Then there's you and me talking with some excitement about people are coming around and waking up. They're getting their head above the water. They're seeing the things that we're seeing, and that's got to be a good thing. But just awareness alone, if you're going up against, 100 trillion pound or dollar empire or pound monster, you can't beat it. I asked you before, where is this going if a lot of people wake up to the things that we're discussing, but yet we're in the kind of predicament that we're in already?
It does put a smile on my face, because I think I know where it's going. I think it's leading to a Christian revival. And that's something that we should all be pretty excited about, but it's something that we have to participate in very vocally and very proudly with complete courage, like tunnel vision. I actually had a sermon this morning. My pastor was a guest pastor, but the sermon was about Christians having to become more vocal and having to assume the roles that Jesus told us to assume as the salt of the earth and as the light of the world. He told us these things for a reason. We have to protect and preserve our values because they don't maintain themselves. And I think the agitation has gotten to such an egregious, there's no way to look away from it level, that the Christians that are still amongst us, even if it's purported to only be 50%, well, that's still 150 million people or more in the country. It's more than that. And we don't need, you and I talked about this on the phone the other night, The idea that we need a 51% majority in order to change the trajectory that the country is heading in, whether
That's
from
not
a
true.
religious or ethnic point of view, we don't need that. We don't need 100. We don't have to convince 100+ million people to agree with us on our views. That's never been how revolutions are sparked. Revolutions are sparked because the general public gets an idea that things are not comfortable, they're not ideal, and then a much smaller body, a concentrated, hyper-concentrated group of people that is only a single-digit percentage of the greater masses have the very clear diagnosis as to why things are not right and why things are uncomfortable. And they are the thought leaders that go out and affect the government and affect the culture in the right direction. America has to be very careful with where it is now in terms of not resorting to violence. And that's like the really tricky subject that people are scared to start talking about what remedies might be required. Because if you hint in any kind of way that there might have to be some kind of physical altercation, then you put yourself in dangerous territories of being a quote unquote domestic terrorist. The Department of Homeland Security coming and knocking on your door, the CIA monitoring your emails, and so on and so forth. And so to be very clear, I know Jeremy and myself both agree on this. We do not want that. We are trying to have the open, transparent conversations out in the public right now to make sure things don't go in the violent direction. We're trying to clarify that when we speak critically about Jewish people or we speak about our ethnic preferences, that doesn't mean we desire any kind of ill will or harm towards those groups of people who believe otherwise, who are from different backgrounds. So the trajectory we're heading in is one of revolution, but we have to be very clear. And like every single time we get on the internet and talk about these issues, to protect yourself, to protect your family, and to protect the success of the movement, we have to be clear that this is not a violent revolution. We don't need people picking up arms and going to the synagogue or going to black communities or going to anywhere else, going to the government. We have to do this nonviolently. We have to do it with a Christian moral compass that says everybody is owed dignity. We have an entire continent of space to work with. We can do this where people are allowed to live with who they are most comfortable with. People who share the same religious faith and people who share the same ethnic cultural practices. As I said, we have a whole freaking continent to work with. We can adjust the way the country is drawn up right now in order to accommodate people freely choosing, hey, I like diversity. I want to live in a part of the country that's highly diverse. Well, maybe we should create a part of the country that is intentionally that way, and we should create a part of the country that is intentionally another option, that is homogeneity, where white people who want to keep their surroundings primarily white or exclusively white, they can opt into that model, and the same is true for Christianity. We can have parts of the country that are explicitly Christian, and we can have parts of the country that are open religion.
Does that contradict the Great Commission, in your opinion? Does that contradict that?
No, because the Great Commission requires evangelization and doing missionary work. Right. So, I mean, you have to have parts of the country that are not yet Christian to go and evangelize too. So that's why I say allowing people to not necessarily be forced to live underneath Christian morality coming from the government top down, we need to provide a space for that and let them opt into that. And this is one of these things that are going to take decades to actually create. We have to be the future founding fathers. The small collective of 100,000 people who change the country in the future, we have to be thinking about an entirely different framework of how America is structured, geographically and religiously and ethnically. And those are conversations that the average person, I'm not trying to be, I don't know what to say. There's a lot of people who simply don't know enough to have those conversations. Yeah. They don't know about the meaningful differences across religions. A very simple example is, let's just say, because of all these Middle Eastern wars that we seem to entangle ourselves in for all of our entire lifetimes that don't seem to be ending anytime soon. I don't know if you've looked into Israel's greater Israel agenda, where they think they are owed annexation of like half of the countries around them.
Oh, you've got Christian Zionist pastors showing maps of that in front of their congregation saying this is actually what Israel needs to be.
Right. Well, guess what? The people who are currently living there, they're going to have a big problem with that.
Oh, yeah.
Whether or not Israel respects that, they're going to try to force those people to go move into European countries, go move to America, go move to these other places.
Yeah, bring them over here after we've turned them into terrorists because we've bombed their families.
Yeah,
Right?
fantastic. But I mean, like when you look at Shia Muslims, they're going to say, hey, in our religion, in our culture, it's okay to have up to 4 wives. All right, well, that doesn't really fit in with the nuclear model, with the Christian faith, with the European society that we built. So there are very tangible, real differences across religions that matter. So we have to think ahead of those problems, and we have to say, okay, if we're trying to maintain a Christian society with some kind of cultural standard, borders have to exist. Legal protections have to exist for preserving Christianity in the West. The same is true for the ethnic fabric. You actually have to have demographic laws on the books that say, just like Israel maintains a majority Jewish status, and just like China and Japan maintain a majority Chinese and Japanese demographic, and just like the 50 plus African cultures are all 80+% African, we have to be willing to, as a nation, to say we got to have laws on the books to manage the demographics of our country. That's not immoral. This is just like civilization 101. But we have to have people who are educated and courageous enough to have those conversations, knowing full well that they will be called racist, knowing full well they'll be called anti-Semitic. And that's the barrier that we're currently bumping our heads against. And we're trying to figure out how many people are willing to be slandered and called these things that don't even mean anything. How many people are willing to put their life savings on the line, their public reputation on the line? And as you pointed out several times throughout the show, that number is increasing. It's not a huge number, but it is increasing. And it's increasing thanks to people like Candace, thanks to people like the HodgeTwins, thanks to Nick for enduring 7 years of persecution and living in exile, having his bank accounts frozen, not being allowed to travel, being denied a career in politics. Yeah. We have people breaking through, and I'll leave it with one last bit of encouragement on that. Just in my personal experience of building my own little brand and my own little platform, if you would have told me that on Instagram, I would be allowed to accumulate 20,000 followers, if you told me that when I started this endeavor, I had already written off that possibility. What I thought was going to happen was I'm going to go on here and I'm going to live stream about the Jewish religion and what they say about Jesus Christ, and I'm going to go and advocate for white people, and then they're going to ban me. My content's going to get pulled down. I'll accumulate maybe 500, 1,000, a couple thousand followers, and then they'll shut me down, because that's what's happened over and over again for the last 20 plus years that the internet has existed.
Yeah.
But I'm the walking evidence of it. You're the walking evidence of it. Nick being brought back to Twitter is the walking evidence of it, that these ideas are finally, for the first time in our lives, being accepted to at least talk about. Doesn't mean everybody agrees, but we at least, as Nick has said, we've established a beachhead where we're allowed to talk about these things. And because everything that we're saying is provably true and morally unimpeachable, we will win. Our success is inevitable. We have God on our side. We have truth on our side. And so we will win. But courage is what's required to get to the victory. And that's what I would hope to leave everybody with. Everybody needs to get off the sidelines. The sermon I mentioned this morning that I heard was, when salt loses its saltiness, it's useless. So if you're a Christian and you think that you're involved in the Great Commission and all this other stuff, you're involved in preserving Christianity in the West, but you've lost your saltiness. You're timid. You're afraid to talk about these other religions that are satanic. Then you've lost your saltiness. You're no longer curing and preserving what Jesus taught us to preserve. And the same is true with the light of the world. Like he says, you don't light a lamp and then put it underneath the table. You put it on top of the table to shed light, and light being metaphorically the thing that sheds truth on darkness and deception. we have to go embody that. We have to be the salt of the earth, and we have to be the light of the world. And these things are straight from Jesus's mouth. They're not Josh's teachings or Jeremy's teachings. These are just Christianity 101 teachings. So that's what we got to get back to, the very, very basics, and we're moving in the right direction. So I actually do feel very optimistic.
Good. Well, I'm glad to hear it, man. And I agree with you. I love that idea of a beachhead for an open discussion at the table of ideas, because these are not new ideas. They're just ones that have been suppressed for so long that people have just been afraid to talk about it. So I hope for the audience that this was a helpful conversation today. I hope that you've taken it with the spirit with which it's intended. And that you're not, just out there looking for sound bites to try to harm me or Joshua or whatever. But that's one last thing I want to say. It's not just courage. You also got to be willing to take the hits. There's still sacrifices that are going to be made. Joshua and his own family, he's had to take some. I've had to take some amongst my own family because people don't want to acknowledge that these are real, problems that we've got to contend with. So I appreciate your courage, Joshua, once again. And man, I really appreciate you coming on today and giving us your insights, because you've been doing this a while and you've got a lot to offer in this area.
I appreciate that. I want to say one other thing, basically what you said about me, I want to say about you to your followers. And I don't know how much of this you share with them. I know you and I are friends, so we talk about some stuff offline. But Jeremy has had to endure some very, very painful, difficult things in his personal life in order to do the work that he's doing. And that's true about anybody who chooses to do this work. And so all of you followers of Jeremy, I want you guys to know that he may not be fully revealing just the cost that he has to endure to do these things. I know them personally very well. The sacrifices, I should have mentioned at the top of the show that I am half ethnically Jewish. I have Jewish family. Practicing Jews and non-practicing Jews are in my family. And so you can imagine when I go out there and say that your religion is satanic and your ethnic cultural practices that your people follow are undermining America. I make all these claims that at the surface level, if you're not willing to actually give these things a thoughtful scrutiny, just to actually really examine them, the people in my personal life have held all of these things against me and been unwilling to even have conversations about them. They just heard that I was talking about those things and it just became over. Our relationship was over. Hard line was drawn. No debates were had. No, oh, well, that's interesting. Where did you hear that? Why do you believe that? The relationships just end. The door just closes. Yeah. And these are people who I love, who have loved me for decades. And I know Jeremy is going through similar things. And it's a matter of warning to everybody else that maybe because the Overton window is shifted and it's a little more comfortable and acceptable to talk about these things a little bit more, maybe you guys, as you feel compelled to talk about these things, won't have to endure such sacrifices. But I just wanted your followers to know that Jeremy is out there paying the price for important priorities that we share. And that's all I'll say about that.
Well, hey, man, I really appreciate the nod in that way. Thank you, Joshua, once again. And to all the followers, everything that we discussed, the links, all of Joshua's links are in the description right now, I believe. But I'm also going to put all of the reference stuff, the Nick Fuentes on the HodgeTwins show, my previous shows with Joshua, amongst others. I'll go back and watch this one time and I'll put them all in. So give me a little time to get that, but within 24 hours, they'll be on there. So Joshua, thanks again, brother. I appreciate it as always.
It was a privilege, my friend. Thank you.
All right. Talk soon.
All right. Bye.